One of the mysteries in a traumatically illiterate culture is why so many traumatized, wounded individuals seek out romantic relationships in older years and then consistently reenact the traumatic wound in one form or another. So let's look at what's going on here. So the first thing is that the original trauma, which often happens in childhood, is too big to deal with for a child. And so there is a dissociation that occurs. And what this means is that the self that is in the traumatic state in the wound dissociates and is partitioned. With that, a lot of intense energy is separate from the larger self, first of all. Secondly, it is frozen in place. With that separation, a lack of maturity, a lack of growth occurs within the partitioned arena of the self. You could think of this as a house that was normally being in a continual process of renovation, but one of the rooms has been locked with instructions to everyone never to look in that room. And so the rest of the building, gets repainted, a new floor gets put in, new furniture, it gets updated. But this frozen room is frozen in time. It's not only frozen in time, but all of the assets in that room, all of its space, its usefulness, is unavailable because some statement is usually present in key traumatic events. I never want to feel this way again. Well, the subconscious, the unconscious mind, how are we going to do that? That is how you feel. Well, we'll lock it away here and we won't let you see who you are in there. Or I hate this part of myself. I never want to see it again, whatever. So there's a partition. And there's a law that we've consciously or just kind of in some kind of a desperate, spontaneous move, we've formed some kind of a barrier that says, this is not me, I never want to know about it, etc., etc. Now, this creates a certain form of amnesia and a certain form of dissociation. And in that state, one, we don't integrate and learn what went on and how to stop it because it's partitioned, it's unconscious. Secondly, we need that energy back and we need that part of ourselves back to be our best selves. And that law is keeping it at bay. And thirdly, we go ahead and forget all about it. But at a deep level, we are drawn back to the terrain that has the potential of reuniting us with our lost self, because only in that terrain do we have the possibility, the promise of being whole. Now, both an abuser and a victim of abuse, the giver of abuse and the receiver of abuse, have a repressed wound because it's not fun from an authentic state to violate and abuse another person. There's really no reason to. It's more fun to connect warmly, tenderly. It's easier to connect kindly and honestly than it is to have secrets, than it is to harbor resentment and hate. So both the giver and the receiver of the wound is in the same situation. There's a part of themselves, and I'm talking about grown-ups. It's a different dynamic if you're 6 years old being abused by your father. Then the issue, what I'm talking about, comes later in life. The abuser, certainly the abusive father, would have a wound that they are compelled to reenact in an effort to get closer to the part of themselves that they've partitioned. Every abuser has been violated in some form. Now, this gets tricky because the core of abuse is a message, and the message reaching a traumatic level. So for a 2-year-old, male or female, to get the message that I hate you, just go away, shut the fuck up, I never want to see you again, and the parent slams the door and leaves the crying infant, in a crib. If that was a point where that sunk in, and through the body language, the facial expressions, there may be no language, but the infant got the message. I hate you. I never want to see you again. This becomes a traumatic moment for a 2-year-old because they are absolutely dependent in their human needs of survival, security, love, and belonging, the first 3 basic human needs. They need to see that person again. They need that person to care. They need that person not to kill them, not to hate them. They need that person's survival, for the love and belonging. They need that attention. And they got the clear message that may not be happening. Well, this creates complete terror, complete meltdown and then you're screaming and no one responds. So the trauma can emerge into various states of low-grade PTSD. I'm screaming, I'm desperate, I need to know that I'm going to be loved and I'm going to be safe. And the exact opposite. Maybe you hear shouting as the parents are now fighting, and now you realize your core caregivers may be splitting up. Now, we know at a very deep biological level, we've been around for hundreds of millions of years in the evolutionary process, and an infant may not know language, but they know tone, and they know facial expressions, and they know regulated energy. And if someone is a bit rough with you, and remember, these are giants. In other words, you might today go to the land of giants. So here you are, suddenly everything around you is 60 feet tall, weighs 10 tons. Okay, you're in the land of giants. You have no idea what they're talking. They're talking some foreign tongue. But if you hear a 60-foot giant raging and shaking, etc., and if they pick you up roughly, and you realize, gee, I could have dislocated my spine in that, you get the idea that your life is in danger. You don't know what these giants are going to do. And if they glare at you and, are they going to eat me? You would be terrified. As a university-educated adult millionaire, you would be terrified to suddenly find yourself in the land of 60-foot giants, shouting, doing things around, sticking stuff in your mouth. And if you start screaming for help, and they, shake you and stick you in a room, are they going to come back and eat me? What is it? The biology, we know regulation. Are they attuning themselves to me and getting the message? 1, tone of voice and facial expressions. And we know scale and we know mass. And the bigger things can do whatever they want with the little things, and we get it. So the point is, if that message comes in, you're unlovable, I hate you, I wish you would die, we can't process that feeling and that terror as an infant, so it dissociates. We shut down a part of ourselves to not deal with that. We go into shock. Our biology tunes that out. But in doing so, a lot of our life energy, and part of us that's pulling ourselves apart, one part's trying to grow, the other part is trying to avoid being killed. And so there's this dissociative message. Now, for us to be at our best and reach our potential, we've got to integrate who we are. We've got to find that 2-year-old and let them know we want them to exist. 1. 2, they don't have to hide their feelings anymore. Maybe the 2-year-old stopped screaming when they learned they would get shaken for screaming, or alcohol would be put in their throat, etc. And so these are deep core messages that we can pick up at any point. The car might have lurched suddenly when we called out for mom's milk. The car lurched suddenly and we got the message. The car is angry with us. It's not safe to ask for what we want. These messages come in all different forms, in all different ways. And they're terrifying, they're life-threatening. And so they need help to be resolved, because to resolve them, we've got to go back to that point in the body or back to that point in our mind. And they're the same thing. Where is the mind going to? It's going to a biological memory. And that's the problem. Our body is remembering that we could get killed for asking for what we want. We could get killed for telling the truth. We could get killed for being angry at abuse because Dad abused us and we were angry and he threatened to kill us. And that went in. And then it got pushed apart. And then we grow up and some part of us is saying, no, I'm not going to stand for abuse. And then some part of us is cowering and saying, I'm not going to do anything to stop it because I could get killed. And we've got to integrate and update that program. Now, in a traumatically intelligent and literate culture, parents would get training and they wouldn't traumatize their children 80, 90% as much. And then there would still be, 10% of unforeseen trauma that got through, car accidents, things like that. And we would actually repair the trauma, and we'd know how to do it as an infant, as a child. And then we would record the memory. This is what your body did. This. And when maybe they're 12 or 15 or something, we'd say, we need to do some therapeutic work. Your body went into shock when you were a 2-year-old. Here's what happened. Let's try and get you back to that point where some part of you shut down, where some part of you is and was lost. And you'd retrieve that part so that you can be a fully intelligent, because the more split-offs you have, the more parts of yourself that are just boxed off and not conscious because they're traumatic, and the last thing they heard was never come back, and they haven't. The more parts that are split off, they've each got a different message and a different survival strategy relative to the moment. And often they're competing unconsciously, never be successful. You'll be, Dad will be jealous. Never do this. Mom will punish you for doing this. Never speak the truth here. Your teacher will, give you a bad grade, whatever. And you get all these different messages. They're all pulling in different directions, and no one's updating the protocols. So you need to integrate and update and relieve the incredible physiological burden that's held in that fear, that terror, that pain of the traumatic event. So how are you going to do it when you are in a shadow avoidant cult? Let's move forward. Let's move on. Let's think positively, right? None of that's going to take you back to your core trauma, because most of the time that kind of frenetic positivity is actually a defense against doing that traumatic work, because there's some part of us that says we're going to die if we feel this. So how do we transcend that? Well, one of the things that we do is we're drawn to ourself even though it's partitioned off. How do we connect with it? Well, one of the things we do is we relive the wound as a victim. Or we relive the wound as an abuser, perhaps as an unconscious way to feel powerful around the part that has been abused and is so terrified. We don't know how to release the terror in the partitioned part. But we are terrified. We feel it. It's like there's some part of me that's just really terrified. And I feel small because I'm afraid of this and I'm afraid of that. And when you feel small and you don't know how to get rid of that terror, One of the compensating mechanisms of the psyche, which is always seeking balance one way or another, is, okay, we're terrified over here. Let's terrify someone over here. I'm afraid of this person because they could fire me. I'm afraid of this person because they could reject me. I'm afraid of this person because they could make me look stupid. I'm afraid of this person, they could arrest me. But you, I'm not afraid of. So I'm living in terror all the time, and I want a balance. I want a counterbalance. So what I want to do is I want to make you feel all the fear that part of me is feeling, that I don't know how to deal with in an abuse-avoidant, shadow-avoidant, trauma-illiterate cult. So I'm going to make you feel this, and for the moment that I'm making you feel terrified, I feel powerful. I don't feel terrified myself. And so it's like, finally, I'm not feeling so terrified. And parents do this with their children all the time. And it's not always conscious. But if you look carefully at the impact that's had on the child, the parent may look for covert ways to terrify the child and then pretend it's no big deal. The child is petrified. But then the parent gets to be the grandiose one, telling the child that they're dumb for being terrified. You know, a 5-year-old who doesn't know anything is told they're going to be eaten by monsters and starts freaking out. And then the parent gets, oh, I could unload a lot of my own fear and panic onto you and have a nice diversion for a time, so they keep it up. And then the child is, scared shitless, and then they say, oh, I didn't mean it. And now they get to feel grandiose again, because, see, I wasn't scared by that dramatic event, etc. You, being so small and helpless, are, of course, afraid of that. You're afraid of me, because I'm big and powerful. When I'm scaring you, I'm terrified when I'm terrified of this repressed trauma and my own childhood abuse and all this. But when I'm scaring you and humiliating you and making you look dumb, well, for those moments, I get big, and it balances out the imbalance. So we're drawn to someone to abuse us or to abuse in these areas of repressed trauma. Why? Well, one is for balance, if we're passing on the abuse. But why would we be abused again and drawn to someone who's going to abuse us? Well, someone who is an abuser, who doesn't know how to deal with the abuse that they experienced, is looking for someone to abuse, one. And who better to abuse than someone who's already been abused in that way, one, who hasn't dealt with it and so doesn't know how to stop it. That's the definition of, a recurring abuse survivor. They know how to receive the abuse. They've already done that multiple times. And they don't know how to stop the abuse, so it's good odds that they won't know how to stop this abuse either. So someone who has the vibe of an abuse survivor in a certain domain, and they have body language, because their unconscious partitioned abuse is influencing them, is saying, I'm the one who gets abused like this. That's still in the field, even if it's unconscious. There's a walk, there's a look, or there's a fear. And abusers pick that up. And they say, oh, you feel like my own abused part feels. I see. I know that, because I remember how I felt back then. And you're feeling that way right now. And you're as terrified of being re-abused as I was then. And that's partly what's doing. I'm terrified, I can't stop it. And so the embodiment of the abuser is saying, well, I'm the powerful one. It's switching the role to gain a sense of temporary power. And so that's one reason they're drawn, is abusers smell and feel out other abuse survivors who are identifying as the victim. They're still in the small state. And how a wound works is an abuser gives the wound, and then someone takes in the wound, and they're afraid. And at a certain point, if that wound gets repeated and repeated and doesn't get healed, then the wound is internalized. The person identifies as the wound. And identifying the wound feels so terrible after a while that the helplessness, etc., looks for a way out. And the easiest way out is to repeat the wound to someone else who's less powerful. Bullies do not pick on another bully. They look for someone who feels and is as likely to collapse as they collapsed when they were the victim. And so the easiest way then to relieve all that pressure is to give the wound to someone else. It's like a virus. It spreads from person to person. And so they give it. Now they're an abuser. So first they were a victim, then they were a victim again. Then they internalized it, which made them a victim and an abuser because they abused themselves by cooperating with the abuser. And then that got so toxic in there, they've got to let some of that toxicity out and they give it to someone else. Now they're an abuser. But originally they were a victim. So that's how wounds spread. And once you're an abuser, then you can spot other victims. And if you're a victim, you can often sense abusers. But if you have not resolved your terror and claimed your power by reintegrating that self and letting it know that you will fight for it, one, and developing a strategy of competence and confidence. Because if you say, I never want to see you again, I never want to think about that again, that is the attitude of a terrified child. That's not the attitude of an adult. Now, every person who has been traumatically abused in a situation of overwhelming power is a terrified child. They regress to a terrified child state, which is why it is the primary responsibility of an intelligent cult to help that person go through that terror and come back to adulthood. Then they can defend themselves and think clearly and sort that out. But this is not what happens in our cult. We blame victims, we shame victims, and we have no idea how to help them out of a traumatized state because we are traumatically illiterate. In that traumatically illiterate state, we then, in a variety of ways, through shame and incompetence, etc., help a victim know that they're safer not asking for help and not talking. So now they're isolated, they're secret, and they're in a regressed state. So what the victim is doing, in part by participating, because a victim may actually be drawn to an abuser, is they're seeking to reconnect with a part of themselves that is separate. And what both parties are looking for in the highest sense is they're looking to get close enough to the wound that they can understand and remember what happened, either by doing it to someone else or having it done again. You remember what's happened. You've broken down the amnesia, number one. Number two, empathize with the terror and the pain of what happened. Number three, figure out a way of repairing the wound, reintegrating the self, and moving forward with more confidence. That's the ultimate end. Now, until both individuals, the victim and the perpetrator, the giver of the wound and the receiver of the wound, who are ultimately the same thing. There's someone carrying a wound of shame, a wound of trauma. You're worthless. You're not as valuable as me. You're not safe. You're unlovable. There's always a message that comes with a violation. And that message is a lie. You are worthwhile. It's not in anyone's interest to dehumanize someone and reduce them to a sociopathic state, to a traumatized state, a dissociated state. That is not in anyone's interest. We're dealing with a lapse of intelligence in the culture and both parties, meaning an intelligent person does not perpetrate a wound. An intelligent, competent person doesn't receive the wound. And an intelligent culture does not breed victims and perpetrators. And an intelligent culture repairs the damage quickly when it does happen. And an intelligent culture helps educate all involved on how to avoid the wound on both sides. Because if you can avoid being harmed by others, you will also avoid harming others. Because it is only victim survivors that become perpetrators. That hideous, horrible, rotten, terrible perpetrator received at a very vulnerable stage that message that they're giving on. from someone or a group of someone or many people in a variety of different ways, and it built up. You know, the teacher said they were dumb, the parent beat them for this, the other one laughed when they were humiliated, and it came together into this, you know, this toxic mass that says I'm worthless. And what am I going to do with this when, you know, and it happens more with men as perpetrators simply because men are wounded in their feminine side the most. Because men, unlike women, are not allowed to cry and ask for help because then they're shamed for being feminine. And so the feminine side of a man is often the most wounded side in the cult. So you have the masculine side of man, which might be honored and respected. The feminine side of man is violated, abused, and then humiliated and shamed for the feelings of being violated and abused. The feminine side of a woman is abused, often by men, but also other women and themselves. And the masculine side of women tends to be respected and appreciated. So the feminine side of the man is the most wounded part of the cult because we're a chauvinistic cult, and men, when their feminine side gets hurt, are not supposed to heal because they're not supposed to be hurt in the first place, and so it gets stuck, you know, a lot more. And so if you are a victim survivor and you have amnesia and you keep attracting abuse and then forgetting and attracting abuse, your job is to remember and to go back to that original wound, ask for help, heal and honor the original wound, lift it out of the body's memory by discharging the emotion, the terror, all of it, with real help. You know, a competent trauma therapist in this culture. In a more intelligent culture, we would all receive traumatic training, and we could all do this as a great kindness and service to one another. But, you know, read books, The Body Keeps the Score, etc. Learn about the terrain, protect that one, understand how to prevent it from happening again. Notice the characteristics of your abusers and say, I'm not going to go for that kind of person again. Notice the ways you set the abuser up to give permission for the abuse. You know, for example, if the abuser steps in front of a doorway and you look down and frightened, what you've just told the abuser is they have the power to frighten you and they can do whatever they want. So there's a different action that you need to take in that minute, such as, oh, would you mind moving out of the door? I would appreciate that. Are you sure you want to murder me? Because they might find the blood. I'm going to kick up a fuss. And if you don't murder me, I am going to hunt you down. Now, what's it going to be, Buster? Get out the fucking way? Or set your life on a very probable path to imprisonment and shame? Well, that's not how victims behave. Victims look frightened, they look scared, they become a little girl, they become a little boy, because they never learned to do anything after the original abuse. And so that's perfectly understandable. You do not shame a child for cowering, and you don't shame a grown-up for becoming a child who hasn't dealt with their trauma. If anything, you shame the cult. You fucked up idiots. This has been going on for hundreds of years. When will we teach this in high school? Give the shame where it belongs, to the idiots that are pretending to educate us, to the parents that hide their own abuse in the family system because it's shameful, to the cult that shames truth and honesty. Give the shame where it belongs. This is inevitable behavior for both victim and abuser. And they're both caught, you know, in a dynamic. The abuser is terrified of the victim because, you know, like Harvey Weinstein, you know, had to hire all these secret. I mean, he's terrified. He has to hire all these secret people to make sure nobody talks, because as soon as you become an abuser, then your whole career, your reputation, it's all just one story away. And you're terrified of your victim, just like your victim is terrified of you. Now, you may put on a big act and play all the grandiosity, but at some level, you're terrified of the power the victim has over you. It's also, you've got to know if you're an abuser that there's something wrong with you, because it's no fun to abuse relative to a healthy consensual relationship. It's no fun. I mean, when you're shouting or raging or beating or raping, there's often an element of dissociation and what am I doing? You're reenacting an abuse that you haven't faced. What am I doing? What's going on here? Why don't I stop? This is going to catch up. This is going through the mind of the abuser. They're going to, oh my God, someone's going to find out. Is that a noise? Is someone coming? Is this? That's what's going on with the abuser. And the only thing that satisfies them is that they're making you feel way more terrified than they are in that moment. And that's all they get out of it. And then every single person they abuse is one step closer to, their worst nightmare of, admitting their wound, that they're unlovable, that everyone hates them and all that. And so, it's terrifying for both sides. But the victim doesn't understand the power they have and how terrified the abuser is. Because they're regressed. They've become the little girl, the little boy again. And so this is why it happens. And it will happen until we become trauma literate as a cult, until we become emotionally literate, until we heal chauvinism, which shames the feminine in men, traumatizing and wounding the feminine in all men, from birth. Just like it shames women for being women, it shames the feminine side of men for existing within a man. Chauvinism is not gender specific. It attacks the most sensitive, vulnerable, uncertain, innocent part in both a man and a woman, and some of the most chauvinistic people are women who hate and brutally attack the sensitivity in men.